Labour's Shadow Women and Equality Secretary, Annalise Dodds. A very good morning to you. This has been a bit of a surprise. What's your view on Theresa May deciding to stand down?
Good morning. Well, this is obviously a really significant decision from Theresa May to stand down at the next election. As you said, it is a surprise, but of course we've heard this from a large number of Conservative sitting MPs. They've decided not to stand for the next election. And I think that does reveal that, frankly, there's no confidence in Rishi Sunak, nor indeed in the Conservative Party, to be a party of government for the future. I think this really strengthens those calls for change and those calls for a general election.
You are Labour's Women and Equalities Secretary. I wanted to ask you on International Women's Day what you make of Sir Mark Rowley's comments this week that violence towards women and girls is a national security threat and it needs to be treated in the same way as terrorism. How would the Labour Party ensure that women and girls are kept safe in this country?
Well, it should be taken incredibly seriously, but unfortunately it hasn't been over recent years. And we've seen, for example, the charge rate and prosecution rate for rape really falling through the floor. That's absolutely appalling. The same has happened with domestic abuse as well, when we've seen prosecutions falling precipitously. So we do need stronger action. You know, Labour, quite frankly, we're fed up of so much rhetoric on this and not delivery. We've set out really clear plans based on what we know works. So, for example, we would have specialists on domestic abuse, on sexual violence in every 999 control room. We'd have specialist courts for rape in every area. We would make sure also that we were tackling the roots of this with, for example, in our schools, proper education around misogyny. This needs to cut right across every government department, because I'm afraid we're seeing an epidemic of violence against women and girls in our country at the moment.
And we're also seeing, according to the counter-extremism czar to the government, we're also seeing that London is apparently a no-go zone for Jews. I mean, what sort of country have we come to?
Well, everyone has to feel safe everywhere in our country, and that's got to include the capital city as well. And I've been really concerned to see the increase in anti-Semitic incidents that has taken place over recent months. We've seen an increase also in Islamophobic incidents. All forms of hate are unacceptable. They need to be prevented, and they also need to be tackled then and prosecuted by police when they take place. And certainly that's been Labour's approach. We've got to be absolutely firm on this, because, as I said, Anne, everyone should feel safe in our country. That's got to include Jewish people as well.
The Tories rather took the wind from your sails, didn't they, on Wednesday, when they announced that they are also going to scrap non-dom tax status. That's something you've been talking about for several months. It was actually the flagship Labour policy. So I'm now sure many people out there will be wondering how you're going to how you're going to fund your plans.
Well, we always will cost our plans. That's, of course, a big difference between Labour and the Conservatives, and people are still paying the price in their mortgages for the fact that Liz Truss set out those unfunded tax cuts and sent our economy into a tailspin. Labour will set out all of that detail. You know, I think this has been a really humiliating week, frankly, for the Conservatives, because for so long they argued against Labour's plans to make sure that people who live here pay tax here, scrapping that non-dom tax status. And if the Conservatives had adopted Labour's plans when we first called for them, we could have seen them paying for 3.8 million more appointments and procedures in our NHS. I think the question is, what took them so long?
When are you going to outline those plans? Because at the moment, that leaves a £2.7 billion black hole in Labour's plans, because you were hoping to scrap the non-dom tax status in order to raise those funds. Well, the Tories have beat you to it.
Well, we, of course, will set out all of our plans and make sure that every single plan is fully funded. As I said, we've always been clear about that. We would be making a number of changes to taxation. For example, we've said that we don't believe that we should be leaving that money from no VAT or business rates on private schools on the table when the schools that 90% of our kids attend are not well funded. So we would be changing tax there, for example. We have set out those changes and we will be setting out the detail. But I would say when it comes to black holes, worth looking at what Jeremy Hunt said about national insurance. He flew a kite of completely scrapping that tax. That would be £46 billion of a black hole. So Labour will always make sure we don't have any black holes, that we set everything out. I'm afraid the Conservatives seem to have a much more blasé attitude to the public finances than we do.
Labour are going to have to hike taxes, aren't they, reading between the lines there?
Well, quite the opposite, actually. And what we've seen, sadly, under the Conservatives is taxes rising to their highest level in 70 years. We've had 25 tax rises under the Conservatives. Labour always wants to see taxes on working people reducing over time. And what I just talked about there was about being really clear and upfront about how we would pay for the additional teachers that we would put into the schools that 90% of children attend. You know, we're being very upfront about those figures, about where we would obtain that money. As I said, by cancelling that removal of VAT and business rates for private schools, I think it's quite right that Labour's being upfront about how we would pay for those promises. As I said, quite a big contrast with what we've seen from the Conservatives over recent months and years.